What happens when one of television's sharpest political commentators goes head-to-head with one of the world's most polarizing public figures? What started as a routine late-night interview turned into an on-air disaster that ended with a guest being thrown out of the studio. Tonight, we revisit the clash between Jon Stewart and Meghan Markle, an exchange so explosive it left the audience gasping and late-night television forever changed. The studio lights of The Daily Show glowed warm and steady as the cameras panned across the cheering audience. Jon Stewart, freshly returned from his latest run of political commentary, adjusted his tie and grinned into the lens with his trademark smirk. The energy in the room was electric. Everyone expected a lively but controlled conversation. And tonight, Jon announced, we're joined by Meghan Markle, former actress, former royal, current podcaster, and perpetual headline generator. Meghan, welcome. Meghan walked out in a fitted cream blouse and navy skirt, her posture straight, her smile carefully poised. The crowd applauded politely as she settled into the guest chair, legs crossed, eyes sharp. Thank you, Jon, she said coolly. It's always nice to be given yet another opportunity to explain myself. Jon blinked, slightly taken aback by the tone. Well, he said with a chuckle, I was going for a warmer welcome, but we'll take it. The audience laughed, though Meghan did not. Jon leaned forward. So let's start with your foundation. You've spoken a lot about service, about creating meaningful change. What's been the most fulfilling part of that journey? Meghan smirked faintly. Fulfilling? Jon, nothing about service is supposed to be fulfilling for me personally. It's about others. I would think someone with your resume of pointing fingers at politicians would understand that. A ripple moved through the audience. Jon gave a tight smile. Fair point. I guess I was just curious about your personal perspective. Well, perhaps next time phrase it better, Meghan replied crisply, brushing an invisible speck from her sleeve. The conversation moved on, but the air had shifted. Jon tried again, adopting a gentler tone. You've often criticized the British press and the royal institution for the treatment you and Prince Harry received. Do you ever worry that constantly retelling your story overshadows the issues you claim to champion? Mental health, racial justice, gender equity? Meghan's smile sharpened. Overshadows? Or maybe it highlights them in a way people like you fail to grasp? You sit here night after night cracking jokes at the expense of others. I speak my truth. There's a difference, Jon raised his hand slightly. I'm not disagreeing with your right to speak. I'm just wondering if what? If I should shut up and smile to make people like you more comfortable? Meghan's tone was icy, her chin lifted. The audience murmured, some clapping nervously, others looking uneasy. Jon exhaled slowly, still keeping his composure. No, Meghan. That's not what I said. I'm simply suggesting that maybe the repetition of personal grievances can come across as self-centered, Meghan cut in. Is that what you're implying? Because I'll tell you this, Jon, when you're silenced in the face of racism, sexism, and outright hostility, repeating yourself isn't self-centered, it's survival. Her words landed hard, her gaze unflinching. Jon forced a chuckle, though his eyes betrayed unease. All right, fair enough. Strong answer. He glanced at the audience, who were now caught between amusement and discomfort. But let's keep this a conversation, not a courtroom. Maybe conversations wouldn't feel like courtrooms, Meghan shot back, if people stopped cross-examining me everywhere I go. The audience laughed nervously again, though Jon stayed calm, his hands folded on the desk. He decided to shift gears. Let's talk about your podcast then. It's been praised for tackling difficult issues, but some critics say it feels more like self-promotion than genuine advocacy. What do you say to that? Meghan tilted her head, her tone dripping with condescension. Critics, Jon, usually write from basements in pajamas. They've never sat where I've sat, spoken with the people I've spoken with, or lived what I've lived. Their opinions are noise. I don't spend my time dignifying noise. The audience gave a mixed reaction. Some applause, some groans. Jon nodded slowly, clearly restraining himself. Fair enough. But you do realize this is late-night television, right? Noise is kind of our thing. Meghan smirked, but her voice carried a sharp edge. Then maybe I'm in the wrong place. The studio went still. Jon tapped his desk, his smile faltering. And for the first time that night, the audience sensed that the routine guest interview was spiraling into something far more volatile. The applause faded after the commercial break, but the mood in the studio hadn't lightened. Jon adjusted the papers on his desk, buying himself a moment before diving back in. The producers in the control booth exchanged uneasy glances. Something was off, and everyone knew it. "Welcome back," Jon said with forced cheer. "We're here with Meghan Markle, who I think it's safe to say never shies away from honesty." Meghan tilted her head, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Honesty is rare in media, Jon. Maybe that's why I always seem to be the difficult guest." The audience chuckled, though the edge in her tone made the laugh feel uneasy. Jon cleared his throat. "Well, let's test that honesty, shall we? A lot of people see you and Harry as symbols of breaking away from tradition. But critics argue that instead of rejecting the institution, you've simply replaced one palace with another. Netflix, Spotify, lucrative deals. How do you respond to that?" Meghan leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Critics," she said flatly, "seem allergic to successful women. Especially women who don't beg for approval. If I'd faded into obscurity after leaving, they'd call me irrelevant. If I thrive, they call me a hypocrite. It's the same tired narrative." Jon nodded slowly. "I get that. But can you see how some might interpret it as profiting from a story of victimhood while living a lifestyle most people can't imagine?" Meghan arched an eyebrow. "Interpretation is their problem, not mine. I'm not responsible for how people twist my reality. That's what tabloids are for. You should know you've made a career out of twisting things into punchlines." The jab landed like a slap. The audience gave a collective, "Ooh." Jon forced a chuckle, tapping his pen against the desk. "All right, fair shot. I do make jokes for a living, but the difference is when I joke, it's not to line my own pockets at the expense of my family." The tension crackled. Meghan's smile froze into a smirk. Trying to steady the mood, Jon pivoted. "Okay, let's bring it closer to home. You've spoken about mental health struggles. That's something I think we all take seriously here. But do you think your story really connects with the average person? Someone who doesn't have private therapists, multiple homes, or a security team?" Meghan leaned forward now, her voice sharp. "Are you implying my pain is less valid because I wasn't broke? That suicidal thoughts only count if you live in a one-bedroom apartment with no heat? Mental health doesn't discriminate, Jon. It doesn't check your bank account before it crushes you." The audience applauded, though some shifted in their seats, sensing her anger sharpening into hostility. Jon raised his hands. "I'm not diminishing the pain. I'm asking if your platform could have done more to highlight those without resources, rather than circling back to your personal grievances again and again." Meghan let out a short, bitter laugh. So now I'm supposed to be the spokesperson for everyone suffering? Forgive me if I don't take career advice from a man whose legacy is comedic monologues." The words were venomous, and for the first time Jon's smile cracked. "All right," he said softly, leaning on the desk. "Let's get real. For years you've criticized the royal family publicly. Some people would call that brave. Others would call it airing dirty laundry. Do you think there's a point where your advocacy crosses into revenge?" The audience hushed, waiting for her response. Meghan's smirk deepened. "Revenge? Please, if I wanted revenge, Jon, you'd know. What I've shared is a fraction of what I endured. But men like you, comfortable, smug behind a desk, love to label women as bitter the second we speak up. It's predictable." "Tiresome," Jon straightened in his chair. "No, Meghan. What's tiresome is every answer you give being a lecture about how misunderstood you are. I'm not your enemy here. I'm just asking questions the public deserves answers to." The crowd gasped, sensing his patience fraying. Meghan leaned closer across the desk, her voice icy. "Questions? Or accusations dressed up as curiosity? You've been condescending since the moment I sat down. Maybe it makes you feel clever to put a woman in her place on live television." Jon exhaled slowly, visibly working to stay calm. "That's not what this is. I've interviewed presidents, war veterans, whistleblowers. You're not being singled out because you're a woman. You're being pressed because you've chosen to put your story at the center of every headline. That comes with scrutiny. For a moment, Meghan said nothing. Then she sat back, crossed her legs, and gave a mocking little clap. Congratulations, Jon. You've joined the club of men who think challenging me makes them brave. Tell me, does it feel heroic to spar with a duchess? The audience reacted with scattered laughter, but it wasn't warm. It was uneasy. Jon's face hardened. I don't need to feel heroic. My job is to ask what others won't. And right now, what I'm seeing isn't a duchess or an activist. It's someone who can't handle being asked whether her choices match her words. The silence that followed was heavy. Meghan's eyes narrowed, her polished mask slipping further. She tilted her head, her voice low and laced with disdain. Careful, Jon. You might just find yourself regretting this little ambush. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh or hold their breath. Jon didn't flinch. Or maybe, Meghan, we're finally getting to the heart of the problem. And just like that, the studio felt less like a late-night set and more like a battleground. Two sharp voices clashing, neither willing to yield. The applause cue light flickered, but this time the audience could barely bring themselves to clap. The energy in the studio had shifted from excitement to something heavier, something close to dread. Everyone knew they weren't watching a typical interview anymore. Jon shuffled his cards, cleared his throat, and forced a grin for the cameras. We're back with Meghan Markle, he said. And, well, let's just say it's been a spirited discussion so far. Spirited? Meghan drawled, her smile razor thin. That's one word for it. I'd call it an ambush. The audience gasped softly. Jon raised his hands in mock surrender. I promise you, Meghan, I didn't lure you here with the promise of tea and biscuits. It's an interview. Interviews involve questions. Meghan's eyes narrowed. Questions or carefully disguised attacks. There's a difference, Jon. Maybe you can't tell because you've spent your career hiding behind jokes. That we drew an uncomfortable laugh from the crowd. Jon sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Okay, let's try a different angle. He leaned forward. You've said repeatedly that your goal is to help others. But why does every initiative, from the foundation to the podcast, revolve around you? Your name, your brand, your story? Isn't true service supposed to be bigger than the individual? Meghan tilted her head, feigning amusement. Oh, so now I'm not allowed to use my own voice to inspire change? Would you prefer I sit quietly, smile politely, and let others take the credit? That's convenient, especially for people who'd rather women stay invisible. Jon tapped his pen against the desk, his patience thinning. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying advocacy shouldn't always circle back to you. If every story is Meghan Markle versus the world, doesn't that cheapen the cause? Meghan's smirk widened. Cheapens? Or maybe it elevates it. Because I'm willing to take the hits others are too afraid to face. Maybe the real problem is that I refuse to play nice for an audience that would rather see me broken. Her words hung in the air like a blade. Jon tried to pivot again. Let's get specific. You accused the royal family of racism in one of the most watched interviews of the decade. But when asked for names, you refused. Don't you think lobbing accusations without details damages the credibility of the cause you claim to champion? Meghan's face hardened. So you would want me to provide names on national television? Put targets on people's backs so tabloids can destroy them? That's not journalism, Jon. That's blood sport. Jon shook his head. No, Meghan. That's accountability. You can't ignite a fire and then act surprised when people demand to see the match. The audience murmured. Meghan leaned forward, her tone sharp as glass. What's laughable is watching a man who's never experienced racism in his life lecture me about how to talk about it. Maybe sit this one out, Jon. You don't qualify. The words sliced through the room. The audience gasped. Jon's smile finally slipped. His voice grew sharper, more controlled. You're right. I'll never know what it feels like to face racism. But I do know what accountability looks like. It looks like facts, specifics, evidence. It doesn't look like vague accusations wrapped in victimhood. It doesn't look like monetizing personal pain until it's a brand. Meghan let out a harsh laugh. Victimhood? Is that your clever soundbite for tonight? Congratulations, Jon, you've joined the tabloids. The difference is they don't pretend to care about fairness. Jon set his pen down with deliberate calm. The difference is I don't get paid by the headline. I don't chase sympathy points. My job is to push back when the story doesn't add up. Meghan's smile twisted. Push back or tear down? Because from where I'm sitting, you're less interested in truth than in humiliating me. Is this how you treat all your guests, Jon? Or just the women who refuse to nod politely while you play prosecutor? The audience shifted uneasily. A woman in the second row whispered something to her friend. Nobody was laughing now. Jon leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. You came here knowing I'd ask tough questions. That's what this show has always done. If you wanted applause and softballs, maybe you should have booked a morning lifestyle segment instead. Meghan leaned in as well, their faces only a few feet apart. Her voice dripped with venom. You know what your problem is, Jon? You can't stand that I don't crumble under your smug little cross-examinations. You thrive on making people squirm, but tonight it's you who looks rattled. Maybe that's what scares you. Owen blinked slowly, his jaw tightening. What scares me, Meghan, is watching someone with immense privilege play the eternal victim while dismissing anyone who dares challenge the narrative. That's not courage. That's performance, the audience gasped again. The silence was electric, heavy, suffocating. For the first time, Meghan's polished mask cracked. Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. Performance? You think I'm performing when I talk about wanting to end my life? You think I'm performing when I describe the abuse and lies I endured? You smug, self-righteous hypocrite, sitting there pretending to care while you sneer at anyone who doesn't fit your definition of suffering. Jon's face hardened. His voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. I think you've confused advocacy with self-promotion. I think you've built an empire out of grievances, and I think deep down you know it. Meghan slammed her hand against the armrest, her voice trembling with fury. You don't know me. You don't know what I've survived, and you sure as hell don't get to sit there in your cushioned chair and decide which parts of my pain are valid. The audience was frozen, caught between disbelief and anticipation. Every word, every glare felt like a fuse burning down toward an explosion. And in that moment, it became clear. This interview wasn't going to end in reconciliation. It was only going to end in fire. The cameras rolled, but the room felt less like a television studio and more like a courtroom on the verge of chaos. The audience sat frozen in silence. Meghan's hand still trembled from slamming the armrest, and Jon Stewart, usually the king of composure, looked visibly drained. He adjusted his papers again, more out of habit than necessity, before meeting her eyes. Let's cut through it, Meghan. You've said you left the royal family because you wanted peace, privacy, and a normal life. And yet here you are on talk shows, podcasts, documentaries. Do you see how people might think you wanted the spotlight all along? Meghan laughed sharply, the sound cold and dismissive. Oh, here we go again? The tired line. You wanted privacy, but you talked to the media. You know what, Jon? That argument is lazy. Privacy doesn't mean silence. It means controlling what parts of your life are yours and what parts you share. But clearly that's too complicated for some people to grasp. The jab was deliberate. The audience reacted with gasps and murmurs. Jon's jaw tightened. I understand the concept of boundaries, Meghan, he replied evenly. But when every boundary you draw conveniently results in another multi-million-dollar deal, people start asking whether it's about privacy or profit. Her eyes flashed. Profit? You mean survival. I had to protect my family. I had to create a life where we could breathe without being hunted like animals. Forgive me for not living in a Manhattan apartment, cracking jokes into a camera, while others did the dirty work. The insult hit hard. A few audience members actually booed. Jon leaned forward now, his patience fraying. You know, I've interviewed politicians, generals, even war veterans. They've faced scrutiny, criticism, sometimes even life-threatening danger. And never once did they sit here and demand sympathy because the press wrote mean things. What makes your struggle so exceptional? Meghan's smirk returned, sharper than ever. What makes it exceptional is that it's mine. That's what you can't stand. A woman who refuses to shut up, refuses to play nice, and refuses to bow down to the Jon Stewarts of the world who think sarcasm equals wisdom. The studio gasped. John blinked, visibly stung, but then something shifted in his eyes. His voice dropped low, controlled, but edged with steel. No, Meghan. What I can't stand is someone who confuses defiance with substance. What I can't stand is someone who claims to fight for others while turning every battle into a mirror reflecting back only themselves. The silence was deafening. Even the camera crew seemed unsure whether to keep rolling. Meghan stood suddenly, her chair screeching backward. I don't have to sit here and take this. I came here expecting a fair conversation, not a witch hunt. John remained seated, his hands flat on the desk. His eyes followed her, calm but unyielding. You came here expecting applause. And when you didn't get it, you turned hostile. That's not a witch hunt, Meghan. That's reality. She glared down at him, her voice rising. Reality. Reality is a smear campaign that nearly killed me. Reality is being torn apart by tabloids while institutions stayed silent. Reality is men like you who think shouting me down makes them noble. John finally stood, his voice firm, carrying over the murmurs of the audience. Enough. This isn't about nobility. This isn't about race or gender or tabloids. This is about accountability. And if you can't answer questions without lashing out at everyone who asks them, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all. The words landed like a hammer. Meghan's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her face flushed crimson. You know what, John? She spat finally, her voice shaking with rage. This was a setup. From the moment I walked in, you wanted a spectacle. You wanted me humiliated. Congratulations. You got your viral moment. John didn't blink. No, Meghan. I wanted a conversation. You turned it into a spectacle. At that, Meghan tried to gather her composure. She straightened her blazer, looked out at the stunned audience, and declared, I don't need this. I don't need you, and frankly, this show doesn't deserve me. A smattering of boos and awkward claps followed. John leaned toward the cameras, his expression hardened. Ladies and gentlemen, it's rare that a guest makes it impossible to continue. But tonight, we've reached that point. He turned to the stage manager. Get her off my set. The words stunned the room. Security guards, hesitant but firm, stepped forward. Meghan recoiled, her voice rising into a near scream. Don't you dare. Don't you dare put your hands on me. I'm leaving on my own terms. And with that, she stormed off the stage, her heels striking hard against the floor. The studio was silent for a beat, the echo of her departure still ringing. John straightened his tie, exhaled, and looked directly into the lens. Well, he said dryly, that wasn't on the cue cards. Folks, I've done a lot of interviews in my life, and I've seen plenty of heated moments, but never have I had to escort a guest out of this studio. Tonight will be one for the history books. We'll be right back. The audience erupted, not in laughter, but in stunned applause, unsure whether to support the host, condemn the guest, or just process what they had witnessed. As the cameras cut, the legacy of that night was already sealed. The interview that was supposed to be a straightforward conversation had ended in chaos. Meghan Markle once again was walking away from an institution in flames. And Jon Stewart, for the first time in his career, had shown that even his patience had limits. But what do you think? Was Jon right to push back as hard as he did? Or did Meghan cross the line with her dismissive and hostile attitude? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I write out every single one. And if you enjoyed this story of when late night TV went completely off the rails, don't forget to hit that like button to support the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next shocking celebrity showdown.